You again? Thought we banned your kind already. The words sliced through the thick, humid air of that narrow corner store, each syllable drenched in disdain. The manager, mid-50s, paunchy, red-faced, snatched the crumpled nylon bag from the young man's hand and flung it onto the floor. The bag tore open on impact, spilling 2 bruised potatoes and a dented can of beans across the dusty linoleum. A hush fell over the store. No one spoke. A woman browsing cereal turned her back. The cashier pretended not to notice. The boy bent down slowly, gathering the scattered items with trembling hands. Maybe you should try a soup kitchen next time, the manager muttered, stepping over him on his way back behind the register. He didn't know. He couldn't have known. The person he just humiliated was the same man who, 20 years later, would open a grocery store just 2 blocks down, where no one would ever be treated like that again. Darius Templeton stood in silence on the cracked sidewalk of Northside Avenue, staring at the faded "For Lease" sign still taped to the glass of the old building. The sun had just begun to set behind the worn rooftops of Stonebridge, painting the sky in tired streaks of gold and ash. In his hands he held the keys to a promise he'd made as a child. On the metal roll-up gate behind him, workers had just finished spraying a bold, vibrant sign. Unity Market, opening soon. But before it was a store. This place was just another vacant structure in a neighborhood long forgotten by progress. It had once been a liquor shop. Before that, a dollar store. Now it would become something radically different. A grocery store where every item was free. He remembered being 10, his stomach growling as he walked the 3 blocks home with a half loaf of bread and a small jar of peanut butter tucked under his arm. The only things his grandmother could afford that week. She always made it stretch, humming softly while slicing that bread with deliberate kindness. She would skip meals to feed him, never saying a word about it. He remembered the flicker of shame in her eyes, the way she smiled too quickly when he asked if she wasn't hungry, and he remembered, too clearly, the day he tried to buy something on his own. How the man at the store laughed, then shoved his hand away. That moment never left him. Not when he started his first job at a shipping dock. Not when he built Templetech Logistics from a 1-truck operation into one of Georgia's fastest-growing freight networks. And certainly not now, as he unlocked the doors to Unity Market, knowing this wasn't charity. It was restoration. Most people didn't understand why a successful CEO, polished and powerful in every way, would spend his weekends hauling crates of produce and sleeping on a cot in the back of an unfinished store. But Darius wasn't doing this for cameras or applause. There was no PR team, no board approval, no press release. This was something personal. It was about dignity. It was about rewriting what it meant to grow up poor, not with shame but with support. No kid should ever be told they don't deserve to eat, he'd say when asked why he was doing this. But really, it was more than that. It was about his grandmother, about every silent dinner, every cold night she stayed awake worrying. It was about the neighbors he saw suffer in silence, the single mothers choosing between gas and groceries, the elderly living off canned soup and memories. Unity Market wasn't just a building. It was a mirror held up to a broken system, and Darius was done waiting for someone else to fix it. It began with a conversation, quiet, almost offhand, but heavy with meaning. Darius was sitting in his corner office overlooking downtown Stonebridge, a skyline cluttered with new high-rises that hadn't existed when he was a child. His assistant had just left a report on logistics projections for the coming quarter, but he wasn't looking at numbers. He was staring at a small photograph pinned beside his desk, a faded picture of himself and his grandmother, standing in front of the broken-down duplex they used to call home. She was smiling. He looked uncertain, as if the camera might steal what little pride he had left. That photo had followed him from desk job to boardroom. It was a reminder, not of poverty, but of resilience. That day, Darius turned away from the window and asked aloud, more to himself than anyone else, what if no one ever had to choose between groceries and dignity again? Sounded naive, but something inside him refused to dismiss it. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how broken the system had become. Food banks were overrun, their shelves picked clean within hours. Government assistance programs helped, but often came with layers of paperwork and endless waiting. Many families in Northside worked full-time jobs, sometimes 2 or 3, and still couldn't afford fresh produce. And worse, they were made to feel guilty for needing help. The solution, Darius believed, wasn't charity. It was access, freedom, a space where anyone, without ID, without explanation, could walk in and leave with a week's worth of groceries. No scanning, no receipts, just trust, just care. But when he floated the idea to a few business colleagues, the reactions were tepid at best. Some smiled politely and changed the subject. Others warned him of abuse and unsustainability. One even chuckled and said, "You'll be handing out filet mignon to freeloaders." Darius didn't respond. He just nodded slowly. That night, he revisited the design blueprints for a failed warehouse he'd purchased years ago and hadn't touched since. He poured a glass of water. Then he made a list, not of inventory but of the people he knew who needed this. The challenges came fast. The building was structurally sound but outdated. It had no proper refrigeration units. The plumbing needed replacing, and rodents had claimed part of the basement as their kingdom. Contractors were slow to take him seriously until they saw his name on the checks. Even then, more than one raised an eyebrow when he explained he wouldn't be selling anything. "So, what's the profit model?" They'd ask. "Dignity," he'd reply every single time. Sourcing produce was another beast. Darius reached out to farmers, distributors, and wholesalers across the state. Some declined outright. Others agreed only when he offered to pay above market rate. Still, bit by bit, crates of fresh apples, cucumbers, onions, and even locally made bread began to arrive. He converted the back office into a volunteer prep station, installed benches near the windows where families could sit without pressure, and painted a mural on the exterior wall. A sweeping scene of Black mothers, Latino elders, children laughing under bright sunflowers. Above it all, one phrase: "What we grow, we share." Unity Market's soft opening was unannounced. No ribbon cutting, no press, just a handwritten sign taped to the glass that read, "Welcome, take what you need." Within an hour, a line had formed, hesitant at first. A woman holding her baby on her hip peeked in, then gasped at the sight of overflowing baskets of oranges and loaves of warm bread. A boy in a school uniform whispered, "Are they really giving this away?" Darius, wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans, stood quietly near the back. He didn't want recognition. He wanted to see how the space breathed, and what he saw made his chest tighten. No one rushed, no one hoarded. A young man took just enough for dinner. A grandmother offered to sweep the floor in return. A teenager helped carry bags for an elderly couple. Unity was already living up to its name, and in that moment, as Darius watched strangers connect over shared need, he understood. This wasn't a store. It was a statement that survival didn't have to feel like begging, that maybe, just maybe, dignity could be as common as bread. The first month tested everything Darius thought he knew about giving. He had expected gratitude, and it came, yes, but so did chaos. Some families wept as they filled their bags with fresh produce they hadn't tasted in weeks. Others were wary, looking over their shoulders, unsure if it was some kind of trap. Rumors spread that the food might be expired, or that cameras were hidden in the ceiling to catch people taking too much. A local councilwoman questioned the legality of giving food away without tracking, but Darius didn't flinch. He greeted every concern with calm. When a child cried after seeing chocolate milk in the cooler, saying he thought only rich kids drank it, Darius knelt beside him and whispered, "You're allowed to have good things too." That moment, simple, fleeting, reaffirmed why Unity Market existed. Not to feed bodies alone, but to untangle the shame wrapped around poverty, one kindness at a time. Behind the scenes, however, things weren't as seamless. Demand surged far beyond projections. What was meant to serve 100 families a week now saw triple that. Volunteers burned out. Shelves emptied faster than they could be restocked. A well-meaning influencer posted a TikTok about the store, and within 48 hours, a line stretched around the block. Darius faced pressure to impose limits, require IDs, or at least set store hours. But each suggestion chipped away at the soul of what he'd built. "We're not here to ration hope," he told his exhausted team one night as they restocked canned goods by flashlight. So he adapted. He hired local teams as part-time helpers, paying them fair wages from his own savings. He partnered with churches, community farms, even a rival logistics company that once tried to undercut Templeton but now offered a fleet of trucks to keep food moving. Unity Market became more than a store, it became a web, a living, breathing network of neighbors, stitched together by a shared refusal to let anyone go hungry. And then came the stories. A father who had lost his job and hadn't been able to look his daughter in the eye for weeks walked out of Unity Market holding a bag of fresh ingredients and the recipe for her favorite soup. They cooked it together that night. She posted a photo on social media, and it went viral. Not because of the food, but because of the smile on her dad's face. A high school student, once mocked for her tattered clothes, began volunteering at the store after school. She now runs Unity's youth council, organizing food drives and mentoring kids her age. One afternoon, Darius overheard her say to a younger boy, "This place gave me back my voice." He didn't interrupt. He just stepped outside, took a long breath, and looked at the painted mural on the side wall, now covered in handwritten messages from families who had passed through. "You saved us. We matter here. Thank you for treating us like people." What surprised Darius most wasn't the need, it was the transformation. People who once avoided eye contact now greeted each other with warmth. Seniors who had rarely left their homes began meeting at Unity's outdoor benches every Tuesday. The market hosted free cooking classes taught by neighborhood elders, who shared recipes from Mississippi, Honduras, Nigeria, and Vietnam. Children chalked rainbows on the sidewalk, while parents laughed together under string lights strung between crates of produce. Stonebridge's north side, long dismissed as a place of low potential, was blooming. Local businesses reported higher foot traffic. New murals popped up on abandoned buildings. And Darius? He remained mostly in the background, always in motion, lifting boxes, fixing leaks, listening more than he spoke. The community didn't just use Unity Market. They claimed it, they protected it, and in doing so, they turned it into something sacred, a place where scarcity didn't mean shame, and where help wasn't a transaction, but a gesture of shared humanity. The emails began trickling in 3 weeks after the opening of Unity Market. At first, they came from small business owners, cafes offering to donate unsold pastries, barbershops offering free cuts for volunteers. But soon, the senders shifted. A regional director from a national grocery chain asked for a call. A VP from a logistics competitor requested a tour. A tech startup in Atlanta offered to build an app for supply tracking, free of charge. Darius was wary. He hadn't done this for partnerships or press. But one message stood out. It came from the CEO of Fairhold Foods, a company known more for mergers than morals. She wrote simply, "We've built stores in every state but forgotten the people inside them. Thank you for reminding us." That sentence sat in his inbox for hours before he replied, not with a pitch or proposal, but with a question. If profit didn't define you, what would? What followed was unexpected. Fairhold Foods piloted a new division inspired by Unity Market's model, offering sliding scale produce corners inside select stores. Other companies followed suit. Templeton Logistics, Darius' own empire, began redirecting part of its fleet each weekend to serve food deserts in rural Georgia. The move wasn't celebrated in investor calls, but the internal morale soared. Drivers who once clocked in and out quietly now wore Unity shirts on weekends and stayed to chat with families unloading boxes. The shift rippled beyond logistics. A local bank offered low-interest loans to community co-ops. A real estate firm donated a vacant plot to build a second Unity Market in Southside. And perhaps most unexpectedly, a former critic, one who had once told Darius his idea would be taken advantage of, invited him to speak at a private roundtable of high-net-worth investors. Darius accepted, but on one condition. "Don't invite me to talk about generosity," he said. "Invite me to talk about courage." The room was sleek, minimalist. Suits and watches glimmered under the recessed lighting. As Darius stepped onto the stage, he wore no tie, just a charcoal shirt and the same worn boots he used at the market. He didn't start with graphs. He started with silence, then a story about a boy once told he wasn't welcome in a store because he looked like trouble, about a grandmother who cut apples in perfect slices so her grandson wouldn't feel embarrassed at lunch, about a warehouse-turned oasis. "You don't have to be poor to understand poverty," he said, voice steady. "You just have to be human enough to remember what it feels like to be hungry, and brave enough to stop pretending numbers matter more than people." There was no standing ovation, just a stillness, a long, collective exhale, and then one hand went up. "How can we help without centering ourselves?" someone asked. Darius smiled. "Start by listening, then keep showing up." Back in Stonebridge, Unity Market remained unchanged. No branding deals, no billboards, just more people coming, more food moving, more hands reaching out not to take but to lift. And yet, the community knew something had shifted. Schools nearby saw better attendance as students had reliable meals. Health clinics reported drops in preventable malnutrition. Even crime dipped slightly, not because of policing but because fewer people were desperate. Darius didn't need data to know change was happening. He saw it in the way neighbors lingered longer in the store, in how former skeptics now sent in handwritten notes. "We were wrong. Thank you for proving us wrong with grace." To him, corporate responsibility wasn't a trend. It wasn't a panel topic. It was action. Quiet, consistent, often invisible but vital. And every time he saw a child walk out of Unity Market holding a fresh apple like treasure, he knew this was the return on investment no spreadsheet could capture. It started with a mural and ended with a movement. Unity Market was never meant to be permanent. At least that's what Darius used to think. He believed in seasons: plant, nurture, harvest, rest. But as year 2 approached and the community around him continued to flourish, something shifted. It wasn't just about food anymore. The store had become a heartbeat, a rhythm that pulsed through Northside, connecting people across language, background, and pain. Where once there was only a broken sidewalk and a locked gate, there were now community gardens, pop-up health clinics, and evening storytelling circles led by elders. Darius no longer needed to be everywhere. The market had grown its own legs, its own voice. Volunteers became leaders. Recipients became givers. And in moments when he stepped back, watching from the bench near the mural as a grandmother taught a child how to weigh produce, he saw what legacy truly meant. Not being remembered but being repeated. One day, a girl named Lonnie approached him with a folded piece of paper. She couldn't have been more than 10. Her mother, a former nurse turned volunteer coordinator, stood quietly nearby. Lonnie's note was short, written in blocky pencil. "Thank you for the apples, and for making my mom smile again." Darius read it twice before looking up. "You kept this?" he asked the mother. She nodded. "She wrote it on our first day here, back when I wasn't sure how we were going to make it." That note now sat in Darius's wallet, behind his ID, worn at the corners. He carried it to every speaking engagement, every meeting, even board sessions at Templetech. It was his compass, his reminder that impact couldn't always be measured in charts. It lived in the quiet, private places, between a mother and child, between hunger and healing. Eventually, others wanted to recreate Unity Market elsewhere. Cities from all over called. Mayors sent representatives. Nonprofits asked for toolkits. Darius obliged, but with one condition: don't copy the model, he'd say. Honor the people. He worked with community leaders not to franchise but to translate. What worked in Northside might not work in New Orleans or Detroit or Tulsa, but the spirit could be adapted. Listening before designing, building with, not for, the people, and refusing to treat poverty as a character flaw. By the time the fifth Unity-inspired market opened in a different state, the national press finally caught on. But Darius didn't grant interviews. He let the community speak. And they did, loudly, with murals of their own, with gardens planted in abandoned lots, with block parties funded by neighborhood bake sales. The media called it a quiet revolution, but in Northside, they just called it home. Years from now, Darius knows his name will fade. He's fine with that. What matters is that when someone walks into a store like Unity and grabs a bag of apples without fear or shame, they feel something shift. They feel human. That's the legacy. Not buildings, not programs, but restored dignity, multiplied across cities. As for Darius, he still walks the Northside streets some mornings, sometimes alone, sometimes with a cart of bananas and bread. People greet him like an old friend, not a founder. Kids wave, elders call him baby, and every so often he stops at the bench by the mural, takes out that worn pencil note, and rereads it, not because he needs reminding, but because he's still in awe that something so small, one boy's memory of a closed door, could become a movement that opened thousands more. And maybe that's the greatest legacy of all. Not just surviving what tried to break you, but building something beautiful in its place, and then stepping aside so others can keep building too.